Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2015's Crypt of the NecroDancer, a rhythm-based roguelike where your personal sense of rhythm becomes the difference between life and death.
Following that is the crossover of characters and elements from The Legend of Zelda, with the hordes of melee action in a Musou game, 2014's Hyrule Warriors. Interesting to pick out a theme this week. You could say, well, Zelda and Crypt of the NecroDancer would eventually come together in Cadence of Hyrule, but no, that's not necessarily how things work around here. And so it would take knowledge of both soundtracks to know that open-throated, operatic, male vocals is the way to go.
It's a weird theme, but I think we were talking about it earlier, and you're like, I can't think of any other game that has those except for literally these two.
And it's only one track in Hyrule Warriors, but you know what? It checks out.
It's one track in Hyrule Warriors, and it's the shopkeeper in Crypt of the NecroDancer, who sings whenever you're close to him. He sings along with the music. It's great.
It's going to be a lot of fun to learn about these soundtracks, but first, Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
So I stopped right before the trial of Chapter 3 in Danganronpa, because it was 11 p.m., and I had made that mistake in Chapter 2, where at 11 p.m. I said, oh, I can do the trial. It shouldn't be that long.
No.
And then I went to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning that night. So I didn't make that mistake this time. I'm gonna jump right into the trial after all the stuff is done today, hopefully. But other than that, I have been playing a game called Ender Lilies, Quietus of the Night, which is a Metroidvania, came out a couple weeks ago, and it's very good. Very, very good. And it's been my bedtime game for a little bit, and yeah, I'm having a real good time with it.
That sounds pretty neat. Always good for more Metroidvanias. You had a tweet earlier this week, at least of time of recording, we were talking about Danganronpa. And it's just how it would be so much better if it were on Switch and playable and portable. And I'm thinking yeah, I can't imagine sitting at the PC to play that game. That needs to be, you're on the couch, you're in bed playing that game. And hopefully that'll be something that resolves itself with Switch.
Yeah, I think I would probably have finished the game by now if it weren't for the fact that I have to tether myself to a PC. Because I was talking to one of our friends about it, and it was this game feels like it was tailor-made for portable because, it was. So
yeah, so I hope that when you get to experience the other games in the series, it's going to be on that version at the end of the year. No games for me. I am slammed with work, so games get pushed to the back burner. Instead, let's talk about some composer follow-up news. Let's talk about some headlines from the game industry from the past week or so, and if composers are involved with it, they're working on things still in the industry. But first, we have to follow up on some of our talk and speculation before E3 2021 and how there were reports and talks of a Switch Pro, and a new Nintendo Switch was announced. It's an OLED model. It's just an OLED screen, which is a really nice improvement if you primarily play the Switch portably. And it has a new dock that has a LAN port in it. As a result, you sacrifice a USB port for that. Fact being, no guts improved, no CPU, no GPU boosts. You're not going to get better performing or better loading games. So it's going to be a pass for me, dog.
See, I'm actually considering it because I do play in handheld about 80% of the time nowadays. Pretty much if I'm streaming a game on the Switch, that is the only time I'm playing docked. Lately, at the very least. So this is kind of up my alley, and maybe I'll grab it, but I don't know if I want a nicer screen $350.
Yeah,
You know, I'm not sure if I want it that much, but we'll see how I'm doing when that drops.
Yeah, so I just figured it was one of the more notable stories of the past week, and just had to sprinkle that out there. That happened.
Yeah, that's a way to put it. It sure happened. Meanwhile, as you alluded to earlier, Danganronpa Decadence, which is the collection of 1, 2, V3, and the summer multiplayer side game, I forget what it's called. It is finally launching on Switch on December 3rd. I'm a little bit bummed that it's all the way at the end of the year, because I think I'm going to forego playing Danganronpa 2 until I can play it on a Switch. And it's kind of a bummer that gotta wait all the way until the day that Super Smash Bros. Brawl was supposed to come out.
I could be a jerk and say, it's going to take you that long to beat the game at the end of the year anyway.
I mean, at the rate I'm going.
No, I think that's the right call. Yeah, wait to play it portably. That's the real experience to play that series for sure. And finally, there's a state of play. Starting right now. Literally right now as of time of recording. So maybe we'll get to update you during recording if anything happens. But that happened, and it's going to seem out of date by this point.
Maybe this will be the one that announces Silent Hill and throws my heart into an incinerator. But speaking of throwing a heart somewhere, taking it out of something, let's talk about Crypt of the NecroDancer. Yes, that is relevant and was not one of my usual nonsense segues. Crypt of the NecroDancer was originally released for PC on April 23rd, 2015. PlayStation 4 and Vita would follow on February 2nd, 2016. iOS on June 30th, 2016. Xbox One on February 10th, 2017. Switch on February 1st, 2018, and then, and I did not know this, it released on Android just last month. In fact, as of time of recording, an exact month back on June 8th, 2021 for Android.
Where do you think is the best place to play this game today?
Personally, I think the Switch is the best place, and if not the Switch, then probably PC. I think it, like most roguelikes, fits better on the Switch in general. So,
yeah, that makes sense. Have the portable option.
Yeah. And I own it on multiple things personally. I own it on PC and PS4 and on Switch. I don't own it on my phone because I don't play games on my phone, but It was developed by Brace Yourself Games, published by Clay Entertainment on PC, and then Spike Chunsoft actually published it in Japan, but all other versions are actually self-published by Brace Yourself Games. Crypt of the NecroDancer is a top-down 2D dungeon crawler where the player moves along a grid to the beat of the game's music. Each world has 3 floors, or zones, as they are referred to. And you can explore these floors, finding items along the way, such as weapons, which all work differently, armor, that one's easy to figure out, and spells, like fireballs and stuff like that. You can find these stairs to the next floor, but they will only open once you have found the floor's mini-boss and defeated them. However, there is a time limit, because the songs don't loop. They just end, and if you haven't reached the stairs by the time the song ends, a trapdoor opens below you and dumps you onto the next floor, regardless of whether you thought you were ready or not.
Oh, that's wild.
So not only does movement have to be done to the beat of the music, which is sort of illustrated as a heart at the bottom of the screen with colored like light bars closing in on it, and when they intersect on the middle of the heart, that's when you're supposed to hit the beat. But it's not just movement that has to be done this way. Everything has to be done this way. Attacking, digging into the dirt walls of some of the crypt sections, using items. Enemies also move according to the beat, and they all have their own distinct movement and attack timings. Projectiles move in time with the beat. So like if you're fighting a dragon or something, Like, it'll breathe fire, and then the fire just only moves forward when the beat allows. It's very, very unique in terms of gameplay, in my opinion. And of course, the more you successfully stay on beat, the higher your score and gold multiplier will go. And this is lost if you either take damage or if you fail to perform an action on beat. Along the way, you can also find captured NPCs, and you can free them. And they'll either serve as shopkeepers on the hub, or they can be trainers who will let you go and practice against mini-bosses or practice against regular bosses. Or some of them are even alternate playable characters with their own abilities. There's like a monk character who gets a free item from the shop on every floor, but if he touches gold, he dies. And there's also one that's like Mary and her little lamb, and if the lamb dies, you lose. So it's weird and very, very interesting. While in the crypt, you can also collect gold that can be used in the shops within the crypts. This is the currency that goes away when you die. Or you can collect diamonds, which can be used to purchase items in the hub. But your diamonds disappear if you don't use them before you go back into the crypt, which I'm not a huge fan of personally, but it doesn't really get in the way of all that much. For most of these items that you are buying with the diamonds, though, it doesn't like give them to you automatically. So let's say you buy a whip, which is the best weapon in the game, and nobody's going to convince me otherwise. You buy a whip, and you don't now have a whip. The whip has now been added to the random number generation table for things you can find down in the crypt. So you're basically unlocking the ability to find these items, which I think is honestly kind of an interesting way of doing it. But I don't know. I can see how that wouldn't like appeal to some people. But there are also like permanent character upgrades that you can buy on the hub, like more health and stuff like that. And then once you have completed all 3 levels of a zone, you are then dropped into one of 4 bosses. These bosses' names are award-winning because they're Choral Riff, which is a rock guitar-based thing, Death Metal, which, you know, explains itself, Deep Blues, which is like a chess set, but is playing like blues music, and then King Conga, who's literally just doing a conga. That boss is the hardest boss in the game, in my opinion. If you successfully defeat the boss, you will earn a large amount of diamonds, as well as unlock the door to the next zone, because unlike your usual roguelike, where it usually will expect you have to get from stage 1 to the final stage in one go, you only have to complete the zone in one go. So like, let's say you complete zone 1, now you have instant access to zone 2, and you can start from there every time. There is a mode, though, an optional mode that is, hey, do all of them in one life. I've never done it. I don't want to do it. I can't get past zone 2 as it is. So, the main character of NecroDancer is a girl named Cadence. When her father, a renowned treasure hunter, goes missing under mysterious circumstances, Cadence goes out on her own to find him. During her search, she falls into a mysterious crypt where a being known as the NecroDancer steals her heart and challenges her to defeat his minions before she can have it back. So the questions become, can Cadence retrieve her heart? Who is the mysterious NecroDancer? And most importantly, are you ready to move to the rhythm of the crypt? This is where I'm going to ask Peter, what are your experiences with Crypt of the NecroDancer?
It is a game that I have seen be played quite a lot, and so as a result, I recognize some of the tracks. So without really playing it myself, I'm able to contribute tracks on the cutting room floor later, but I don't think it would be a game that I would be good at. I like the idea, but it's a gameplay style that I would find challenging, I think.
I'm basically in the same boat. I love this game. I love Crypt of the NecroDancer. It's probably, before Hades, it was probably my favorite roguelike. I think both Hades and Dicey Dungeons have sort of bumped it down. but I'm so bad at this game. I've never made it farther than Zone 2, ever. Just never. And I don't know if I ever will. I go back to it every once in a while and I'm like, yeah, I think I can do this time. And then it turns out I'm wrong. So I had to go look up video of the later zones so I could accurately talk about them for this episode, because I've never seen them myself. They might as well not exist in my world. But yeah, I absolutely adore the way this game plays. The soundtrack is, in my opinion, Danny Brownowski's best work ever. Not to say that he hasn't sort of topped it recently with Cadence of Hyrule and stuff like that, but this game's soundtrack is absolutely amazing. And I'm very excited to talk about it. But before that, let's talk about how this game came into being. So, NecroDancer started as a concept by Ryan Clark, who would go on to serve as the game's director and designer, as well as one of the programmers and one of the writers for the game. The reason this concept came to mind was he was thinking about the formula of roguelikes, specifically how a lot of roguelikes really lean on procedurally generated levels. And he felt that a large amount of the time, a player would lose a run, not because of their lack of skill, but because the random level generation had just sort of screwed them in an unfair way. So he wanted to make a roguelike where the player was more in control of their own fate, and he didn't want to make it so that they were dying due to unfair level generation. He wanted to make it so that, you died and it was your fault and you can tell it was your fault. And for this inspiration, he sort of looked to Spelunky, which is kind of one of the games credited with this started the indie roguelike boom, kind of. I think it was that and Rogue Legacy that a lot of people point to.
Mm-hmm.
He looked at that for inspiration because he felt that it did a good job being, quote, a game that is really hard, but you can still improve. If you die, you still know it was your fault. Basically, exactly what he was looking for. But at the same time, he had looked to other roguelikes, and he kind of figured that, a really big part of roguelikes was this sort of turn-based gameplay style. And he felt like when stuff like Spelunky was not that, it kind of lost a little bit of the genre's flair. So he began working on a concept that would kind of keep some of that turn-based action, and eventually he ended up with the idea of real-time turns that lasted a very short amount of time. And then eventually he realized that, this kind of feels very similar to beat-based rhythm gameplay. So he began to sort of flesh out the project around the idea of it being a music-based roguelike. So one of the first things that changed throughout development was when he put it in front of playtesters. Originally, the sort of window for being able to hit the beat was incredibly accurate. And then he realized as he was watching them play, as they moved forward in the game and became a little more stressed or entered a room with a bunch of enemies, they'd suddenly get less and less able to accurately stay on beat. In his opinion, this kind of went against his initial desire for the game to be a more fair roguelike, sort of. So he made a wider window and also apparently programmed an auto-calibration feature that would be able to tell if a player's stress had caused them to start trying to hit the button too late or too early, and then would adjust the timing based on that. And he felt that both of these features actually helped make the game a lot more fair, in his opinion. Another change over the course of development, and this blows my mind. I can't imagine the game working like this. Originally, the player was going to be moving on beats, while the enemies moved on half beats.
Oh, wow.
While he was having that play tested, he started to feel like this actually brought it closer to the roguelikes he was trying to differentiate the game from. So they just moved it to everybody acts on beats specifically. I can't imagine what the game would have looked like if he hadn't changed that. That sounds like a nightmare. So NecroDancer was released through Steam Early Access on July 30th, 2014, which was slightly more than a year before it would fully release on Steam. It reviewed quite well upon its initial release. Highest Metacritic score it currently has is 92 for the iOS version, with the lowest being Xbox at 83. In terms of awards, it won Best Audio at GDC, won Best Use of Sound, New IP, and Game, Music or Performance-Based at Navigator, where it was also nominated for Original Light Mix Score, parentheses New IP. I don't know what that means, but hey. It was nominated for Excellence in Musical Score at South by Southwest, which it lost to Ori and the Blind Forest, which, hell of a category that year. It was like Ori and Metal Gear Solid 5.
2015 was an amazing year. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, like, big year for that. And then it's listed as a runner-up at the Edge Awards for PC Game of the Year and Best Audio Design. So it didn't win a huge amount of awards, but it does have a few to its name. And then in January of 2017, they released a prequel expansion, Crypt of the NecroDancer Amplified, which released featuring a new main character, 3 other characters, new items, and an entire new zone. And that zone had a new boss named Fortissimo, which is great. So when bringing the game to Switch, they had actually contacted Nintendo about the possibility of maybe, creating Switch-exclusive DLC based on some of Nintendo's various properties, which they happen to be fans of. And Nintendo, in a sense, turned them down because this conversation instead branched into, brace yourselves, creating an entire full new game, that game becoming the crossover Cadence of Hyrule, which saw Cadence falling into the world of The Legend of Zelda and fighting alongside Link and Princess Zelda, which is still one of the coolest reveals they've ever done, and I wish we'd get another of that kind.
I mean, yeah, on top of it all, Nintendo working with, their IP for an indie game. I mean, that's just great.
Yeah, and I don't understand why Team Cherry hasn't already been handed a 2D Zelda game. Or a Metroid game.
Yeah, I think a Metroid game, yeah. If they weren't working on Silksong, yeah.
They absolutely should be handed something to make something, because they're damn good at their job. So, we have actually already talked about the main composer for this game. That is Danny Baranowski, who was covered all the way back in OSC episode 5. That was a while ago. But there is a performer on this soundtrack who we have mentioned briefly in other episodes because we've used him as our transition songs a couple of times. His name is Jules Conroy, but you might know him better by his stage name, Family Jules. Now, Conroy was born on June 11th, 1991 in Massachusetts. He currently works out of San Diego, California, where he moved specifically to be closer to people like Adriana Figueroa and Insane in the Rain Music, etc., who also all lived in that area. He also happens to use the name Family Jules on YouTube, where he regularly posts rock covers of video game music. If you have not looked into his channel, go look into his channel. I personally became aware of him before this show started. I was aware of him because I found this super good rock cover of Wicked Child from Castlevania. And I think that's the transition song I used when we talked about Castlevania on the show.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So yeah, he's damn good. His main instrument is the guitar, obviously, but according to him, he can also play a variety of other instruments, such as the cello, he can play keyboard, and he can also play the ocarina. In 2010, he challenged himself to put out one cover every week for a year. And he did it. He was able to churn out one every single week, ended the series in 2011 with a cover of the Super Mario 64 credits theme, and when all was said and done, this project had netted him over 10,000 new subscribers, and he just kept growing from there because at current time, he is sitting at over 487,000 subs, which still doesn't feel big enough, so everybody should be following Family Jules.
Mm-hmm.
His main goal, he has said on his website, is to get into making game music, and he hasn't really had a game where he's been the main composer, but he has now contributed to a few games, though that list is still unfortunately short, and I honestly cannot wait to see the moment when he actually gets to, create the soundtrack of a video game, because right now, his credits basically include he was a performer on the final boss theme of The Binding of Isaac, and he did some performances on some of the tracks in Crypt of the NecroDancer, as well as provided performances and an alternate soundtrack in Cadence of Hyrule, which is super cool because he is a huge Zelda fan, and I'm so happy he got to, officially work with Zelda music. As for historical development research of Crypt of the NecroDancer, like I said, soundtrack was composed by Danny Baranowski, and you can go back to episode 5 to learn about him, but the game also features, and added over time, several alternate arranged soundtracks by a variety of other artists. So, for instance, there is A Rival, who we talked about on episode 106 for his work on Street Fighter Cross Mega Man. You have Family Jules, who obviously we're covering right now. Jake Kaufman did one. We covered him all the way back in episode 12 for his work on Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, and he's come up on other things for things like Half Genie Hero and Shovel Knight. Various artists of the label Girlfriend Records, though I was having trouble finding the names of said artists. Various artists on OC Remix made an alternate soundtrack that was included as part of the Amplified DLC. Chip Zell provided a alternate soundtrack. We talked about her in episode 104 for her work on Dicey Dungeons, and she got brought up in the River City Girls episode. And very important for your tastes, because one of them is a soundtrack made up of remixes of Danganronpa music by Masafumi Takada himself. We talked about him back in episode 20 for his work on Danganronpa 2, and then he was brought up for V3 and Danganronpa recently.
I do remember that being a newsworthy article of he's contributing Danganronpa music to Crypt of the NecroDancer. Did I ever go and see how it implements itself? No. But I did know that existed, yeah.
I had completely forgotten about that, and when I finished Danganronpa, I think I'm gonna go look and check it out and see how it sounds. Baranowski says that a friend of his dubbed the genre of music he wrote for NecroDancer as, quote, Spook House Rock. Great name. And the music of zones is also made specifically to up the tempo with each floor, making the tension and sort of stress levels of the player go up a little bit along with the tempo. Because, faster beats are kind of harder to keep track of as they go, so. And I also want to give a shout out to the thing we mentioned at the start of the episode. There's a shopkeeper. He's an opera singer. And if you're close to him, you can actually hear him singing along to the music. It's really cool. Every song has a version where the shopkeeper is singing. It's great.
Yeah, and it's dynamic when you approach him and move away. It's fantastic. One of the best things about this soundtrack, I think.
And that was apparently specifically Baranowski's idea. And they just put it in. So, yeah, 100%. So let's get into what this game sounds like. Because it's a music-based game. And the music is the star of the show. So let's start with critical track number 1. This one's just kind of fun to listen to. It's Rhythm Mortis. First of all, a lot of the names on this soundtrack, much like my game last week, A+. A+ naming schemes.
Gotta love pun titles. It's so good.
Yeah. This is the song that plays in the game's hub, where you can enter the different zones and do the shopping and all that. Usually in-game, it actually plays through a filter. In fact, the filtered version is actually on the soundtrack, but the clip is the unfiltered version because, you know, you want to hear all the bits and pieces. But I really like this song. It's a nice, low-key, really catchy song that just really sort of fits the idea that you are taking your downtime between trips down into the different parts of the crypt. I dig this song a lot.
For a main hub area, I think it's important to include in the Critical 5. It's one you keep going back to. And we're going to mention it a lot, I'm sure, but the fact that these songs all have such distinct beats. And even for the hub, you don't need it to have a distinct beat. It's not critical to move about the world and attack and dodge and all that, because you're in the hub, you're safe, but yet it still has that solid beat that it's so easy to tap your toes to, bob your head, whatever you do. And that's a defining fact about the game and makes perfect sense.
Yeah, every single one of these songs, I think I read Baranowski briefly touch on it in some interview where he talked about how, it was very important that players were able to identify the beat even if the visual cues of the bars on the heart weren't there, because, your ears react faster than your eyes, essentially. That's true for basically anybody.
And it's all about getting into that flow for gameplay, right? So
exactly. Following that is actually, I think, my favorite song in the game. It is critical track number 2, Crypt. This is the song that plays in level 1-2. And like I said, I think it's my favorite regular song in the game. I absolutely adore just the grit on the bass in this song. It's just in your face and it's awesome. And man, I don't know what else to say about this except if you hear this song and you're not already super on board, this might not be the game for you.
You're right. This is a good check to see if is this the kind of music you're okay listening to for, for runs, for repeated play sessions. I think this is one that, gets right into that immediately. Definitely one that I recognize and identify, especially, once the bass gets going and then the the melody that comes in. It's that distinct kind of synth sound that this game has. It's a really good one for sure, establishing the feel of it pretty early on.
Yeah, it fills space very well, if that makes sense. And it's just, I love playing the level with this music on, which is good because I've never made it past the next world. And so I replay World 1 a lot because I'm bad at video games. But let's talk about bosses now. Let's talk about a boss fight, because critical check number 3 is Metalmancy. This is the song that plays during the death metal boss fight. This one features a guitar performance by Family Jules on the regular soundtrack even. And this is absolutely one of my favorite regular boss themes. Honestly, even if it wasn't one of my favorites, I would still probably put that in the critical 5 because, like, this song is Family Jules, the song. Like, this is the one.
Yeah, this is how his YouTube channel generally sounds. So it's, again, mixed with the synths of, Baranowski. It's a great combo. It's a really smart audio casting decision, if you can call it such a thing. But yeah, that melody comes in what I guess is the chorus. And again, yeah, ding, definitely recognize that one. It's a real catchy metal piece that, again, gets the beat going inside you.
Yeah, it absolutely rips. It's super awesome. I don't think I've ever been able to beat death metal. I'm pretty sure there's only one boss in the whole game that I have been able to beat, and his song is not one of the critical 5 or cutting room floor tracks. So, let's get into one of the worlds that I've never seen in person, but I think is really, really cool, is critical track number 4. Technically 2 songs. It's Dance of the Decorous and March of the Profane. So these are the songs that play in level 3-2. March of the Profane, obviously, as you can probably hear, features a guitar performance by Jules Conroy. So Zone 3 is really interesting, which makes me kind of sad that I've never been able to play it myself. It's floors where, like, parts of it are ice themed and parts of it are lava themed, and it actually switches between the two in real time, depending on which one you're standing on. And also, like, if you're standing right in front of the border between the two, they're both kind of faded into each other a little bit. It's really, really, really cool. I did not know that's how it worked until I went and looked up a video of somebody playing it. I knew that there were 2 songs, but I didn't know if it was like you hit a switch and it changes over or anything like that. But obviously, if you can't tell, Dance of the Decorous is the ice themed song, and March of the Profane is the fire themed song. I personally think I like Dance just a little bit better because it has that really cool sort of rewind sound effect that I think gives it a lot of personality. But March is, like, again, this is Family Jules to a T, and it absolutely rules. It's super good.
Yeah, also because Dance has the melody cut through a little bit more, whereas March, brings more of the meat, if you will, with the added guitar instrumental and the chords to it. Is it weird to say that this is my favorite song on the soundtrack because it is the one I identify most on this game? So I didn't know it was featured this late into the game with level 3-2, but maybe it was like a sticking point, trying to get past it. But I do remember hearing this song a lot. So take that for what it's worth.
I think this is also one of my favorite songs. I think critical track number 1 and number 5 are the 2 that are tied for my favorite overall. But these 2 songs specifically, I absolutely love them. They're so cool. But speaking of critical track number 5, let's get into it. It is Last Dance. This is the song that plays during Phase 2 of the final boss, which, can I just give a quick shout out to Phase 1's song title, Momentum Mori? Both of those titles are incredible. Like I said, I think this battles with Crypt for my favorite song in the game. Can you blame me? This song is incredible. And Last Dance is probably one of the coolest names to give to a final boss song there's ever been.
It's real good. I love how when you're talking about like the tempo picking up, like this is much faster compared to some of the pace, at the earlier tracks in the game. And so I can only imagine the chaos, and it's more evidence that makes me think, yeah, I'd be real bad at playing this game. It would take a lot of practice to get this good, but to sit back and enjoy the music, yeah, it's a real strong track.
I learned recently what the final boss's name is. It's Dead Ringer, and he's bell themed. That's great. Every name of everything in this game is great. But this song in particular, actually is one of the songs that inspired a very particular boss fight in one of the game concepts that I have in my brain that will never be made in a video game. So I feel like I have a very strong connection with this one. Anyways, we have some tracks on the cutting room floor, including you having a couple. Hit me.
All right, so I have a couple from a little earlier in the game. I feel like it's important to shout these ones out. This first one is Disco Descent. You go from one of the fastest pieces in the game to one of the slowest tempo pieces because Disco Descent plays on level 1-1. And I figured it was just important to kind of mark the beginning point, like when you're still kind of learning. You do have like a tutorial section to kind of get the basics going, but once you're thrown into the wolves, so to speak, this is kind of your opening piece, if you will, into Crypt of the NecroDancer. So I like the beat of it. And again, it's establishing that meter, that pace they gotta really move to.
Yeah, this song kind of gets overshadowed by Crypt every time I play Zone 1, but like all three of the songs in Zone 1 are great. This one included.
I feel like we gotta give level 2 some love, though. And we do that with my other track on the cutting room floor. This is Fungal Funk. Another track that I do remember fondly from watching Crypt of the NecroDancer be played. Also just another cool alliterative title. Again, Fungal Funk plays on level 2-1. So you're kind of getting into that next sort of stage of tempo. And you're doing some funky things with the rhythm. It's a little tougher to keep track of the beat here because you're going from this kind of syncopated rhythm, and then once you get into the chorus with that synth going off with it solo, it's just really, really cool stuff. It's a different sound here, and I also wanted to kind of contribute that. It's like, this is also what the soundtrack can sound like at points.
I have a vendetta against this song because I usually lose either on level 2-1 or 2-2. So this song and the one after it, I have a personal vendetta against.
It just haunts you.
It just haunts me like a NecroDancer. My two tracks on the cutting room floor. The first one is another of the regular boss tracks. It is Conga Conga Kappa. This plays during the King Conga boss fight, and is, in my opinion, the hardest regular boss in the game, because the beat actually stops. Because it's a conga line. It goes dun 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 dun, and then you have to stop because there's no beat there, and if you move at that point, you lose your multiplier. No. So it's really hard. It throws you off super, super bad. I've never been able to beat this one. I'm pretty sure Deep Blues is the only one I've ever been able to actually beat. I love this song. I think this boss is a fun idea. Oh my god, I'm worse at this boss than anything else I've seen in the game.
And when you can compare this track with, memories and a mechanism like that, yeah, that's going to make it stand out for sure. It does sound like a fun song, though, on its own, that's for sure.
And the other track I have on the cutting room floor is, again, 2, technically, because it's Stone Cold and Igneous Rock. These songs play on level 3-1. Again, it's doing the switch between the ice and the fire. And obviously the fire part just has more family Jules goodness. But other than that, like Stone Cold, even on its own, is absolutely fantastic. This soundtrack is so good.
It almost sounds like Igneous Rock is a little faster, and that would kind of mess me up, that's for sure. But that's just from an initial blush. I do remember this one as well, which makes sense for how much I remember the one on 3-2 with Dance and March. But I remember this one more for the shopkeeper singing along with it. Like it's yeah. I can definitely kind of hear him in the back of my head, that's for sure.
They're all so good. That's in Cadence of Hyrule too, by the way. He comes back.
As well it should be.
He's great. So you can hear him singing Zelda music now. So what will I never forget about Crypt of the NecroDancer? God, I wish I was better at this game. I've bought it like 4 times in my life. 3, I guess, actually. And I've never made it past Zone 2. And this is over the course of years. Years! So yeah, that's my only wish. Maybe I'll go pick it up again after this episode and suddenly have an epiphany and be good at it. That won't happen, but I can dream.
It's a really neat concept for a game with definitely some catchy tunes. And you showed me earlier today before recording that NecroDancer is intercapped.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that the D was capitalized in NecroDancer, but I guess now I'll never forget that.
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea, despite the fact that I've looked at that title multiple times over several years, and until I started doing research for this episode, never realized that the D in Dancer was capitalized. So, Anyways, let's go on a transition with, a fan remix or cover. And this actually comes off of that Overclocked Remix Amplified soundtrack. So this song is technically in the game, but it was done by an Overclocked remixer, essentially. So it's kind of a gray area, but I still really like this one. It is a remix of Conga Conga Kappa by DJ Robo Rob. And every remix of Conga Conga Kappa is super good, so please enjoy that. We will be right back.
Alright, so we vaguely promised a PlayStation State of Play update at the beginning of the episode. The State of Play has come and gone. Here are some headlines. Jet the Far Shore was featured. That's the Super Brothers game where Andrew Rorman, or Scientific, is doing the music for that game. So that was showed off some more. We got to see gameplay for Lost Judgment. All of the weird side mini-games that Ryuga Gotoku Studio is cramming into this sequel of Judge Eyes. So Lost Judgment launches on September 24th. That isn't new information, but hopefully we'll hear some more music from Hidenori Shoji and or Saori Yoshida soon. And Death Stranding Director's Cut has a release date. It is also September 24th, and that does feature music from Ludwig Forssell, who we've mentioned on the show before. So those are kind of your big top headlines. They opened it with Moss Book 2, which, making a sequel of that game for PlayStation VR has nothing to do with composers we've talked about before, but that was probably the biggest surprise.
Interesting.
In the meantime, though, let's get back to talking about games. Games with open throated singing operatic singers. Let's talk about Hyrule Warriors, which is a weird one for that theme, that's for sure. Is this our first Musou game that we've talked about?
I can't think of another one we would have talked about.
I think it is. So when we talk about Musou games, these are generally translated over here in the West as Warriors games. So primarily Dynasty Warriors, with the long... Dynasty Warriors 9 was the most recent one. So they're games where it's third person. It's a hack and slash melee game where you're taking big crowds of armies on. And it's been ripe with pairing it with other franchises. So this year we got Persona 5 Strikers, which that was the Persona 5 / Musou crossover. There's been a One Piece Musou. There's Dragon Quest Warriors. All sorts of different franchises have crossed over with this very adaptable game format. And in 2014, there was Hyrule Warriors. So Zelda Musou released on August 14th, 2014 in Japan for Wii U. Europe got Hyrule Warriors on September 19th, Australia on September 20th, and North America on September 26th, 2014. Then Zelda Musou Hyrule All-Stars. So Zelda Musou Hyrule All-Stars released for Nintendo 3DS in January 2016 in Japan. The rest of the world got this game as Hyrule Warriors Legends in March 2016. This added new characters, and all this added DLC content was also made available for the Wii U game. But then Zelda Musou Hyrule All-Stars DX launched on March 22nd, 2018 in Japan for Nintendo Switch. The rest of the world got Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition on May 18th, 2018. So, primarily we're going to talk about the original Hyrule Warriors. For soundtrack purposes, also the original Hyrule Warriors. But it's important to mention these other versions of the game because of just how much was added, honestly. So, Hyrule Warriors was developed by Omega Force and Team Ninja. It was published by Koei Tecmo in Japan, but Nintendo in the rest of the world. As we mentioned, a Musou game, a third-person hack-and-slash game with large amounts of enemies, and with this one, it's involving characters and elements inspired by The Legend of Zelda. So, Zelda meets the gameplay of a Dynasty Warriors game. So, you defeat army leaders and their big hordes with various melee combos and weapons. You secure bases on the big map. You find items in treasure chests. You take down the bosses that appear. And you generally have levels that, the story progresses and you have to clear the objectives to pass the level. Then you take those collected items from the levels, whether it was spawn drops from enemies or chests that you found, and you take all those items to upgrade your characters and your weapons. So the story of Hyrule Warriors, it takes place outside of the official Zelda canon, where the evil Ganondorf is plotting his resurrection through Sia, a sorceress who protects the balance of the Triforce. See, Sia has become fascinated with the spirit of the hero of legend, with her romantic feelings for the hero providing Ganondorf an opportunity to purge her inner light. As a result, Sia becomes consumed in her desires, opening the Gate of Souls, which is a portal to different time-space realities of Hyrule, and she does this to amass an army of monsters. So when Princess Zelda is unaccounted for in Sia's opening attack against Hyrule Castle, the soldier in training Link and the general Impa search for her, but they encounter Lana, a sorceress who comes from the same clan as Sia. What is Lana's true story? Can Ganondorf's return be stopped? And can Sia be defeated to close the Gate of Souls and return everyone to their proper time? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Hyrule Warriors?
I have played through the regular game. I did own it on Wii U, and I played through all that. Never bought it on 3DS, because, boy, it looked like that game sure struggled to play on a 3DS. And then I did end up buying the Switch version, and I played through that and did a bunch of its challenge mode and all that as well. So I really like this game. I think it's a very, very, very good game. The story is very boring, but the gameplay is great. And also, they unfortunately did my boy Skull Kid dirty, because playing as him is the most annoying thing in the world, because he fights using an ocarina. So every time you swing, every time you attack, you just hear the sounds of an ocarina being played. It's as annoying as it sounds. But yeah, I really like Hyrule Warriors. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect example of what can be done with collaborating with a storied franchise with this Musou Warriors format. A ton of content, yes, especially when you consider the definitive edition. I mean, you could look at Gerard the Completionist Khalil and his adventures with how much there is to complete with these games, both the original and the definitive edition. I mean, just a massive amount of time that can be put in, and I think it's really dependent on how much you enjoy playing a Musou. It's a very acquired taste. You either love it or like you think it's repetitive and boring and it's not for you. But if you enjoy playing it, there's a lot to have here, and it's fun to be on that grind. I know I put plenty of hours both in the original and more so the definitive edition on Switch. So when talking about Hyrule Warriors some more, I think it's important to note that it specifically pulls Zelda characters and influences, at least in the base game, from 3 Zelda games. There's Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. And at a certain point in the story, you have these 3 branching paths that you can tackle at any time. So these main characters that you can play as include Link, Impa, Sheik, Lana, Zelda, Darunia, Ruto, Agatha, Midna, Zant, Fi, Girahim, and Ganondorf. Oh no, he comes back. Oh no.
Who could have guessed?
Oh no, maybe he's the big bad at the end of the game. Oh no. So Sia and her subordinates Wizro and Volga are added as playable characters in a free update that was on the Wii U version. And with 2014 alongside Mario Kart 8, this is when Nintendo was starting to experiment with paid DLC. And so Twilight Midna, Young Link, and Tingle were made available as paid DLC for the Wii U game. When it came to Hyrule Warriors Legends, you had Toon Link, Tetra, King Daphnes, Medley, Skull Kid, and the new character Linkle, and they were all new characters that were included in this Legends version of the game. There was some way that you could, make them available in the Wii U version, but yeah, there was another way of how do we make this more content on Wii U?
I don't know who King Daphnes is. Are you talking about Boat Dad? Because his name's Boat Dad.
Boat Dad, King of Red Lions, however you want to, turning into and wave-based attacks. Yes, that's King Daphnes. And then, even for Legends, there was still more paid DLC that you could get. So then you had Marin, Toon Zelda, Ravio, and Yuga to kind of round out some more of the different Zelda games that had not been covered to that point, and they were all paid DLC for Legends.
Marin is so cute! Her design is so good.
She is adorable, and it's a perfect scaling up from little 2D Link's Awakening sprite to a full 3D character. Let's just say for the record, all these characters are included in the definitive edition. If you're going to play this game today and you still have not played Hyrule Warriors, just get definitive edition on Switch. It's not worth going back to older systems with all the DLC, and it's just a mess, an expensive one at that. So yes, just get definitive edition. Have a great time. The concept for Hyrule Warriors was first proposed by Team Ninja lead developer Yosuke Hayashi, while he and Koei Tecmo executive VP Hisashi Koinuma, who was in charge of the Warriors franchise at the time, they were discussing a possible Dynasty Warriors cross-franchise game with Nintendo. Now, the Zelda franchise was chosen due to the fact that Hayashi, Koinuma, and many staff at the company, they were fans of the series. So, all right, let's make the pitch to Nintendo, and let's show our game One Piece Pirate Warriors to show Nintendo this is how a franchise could be implemented and combined with this Warriors formula. Nintendo said, yep, we trust your judgment and your ability to make this game. Definitely more pros than cons. And so they put longtime Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma to oversee the project. The game was announced in December 18th, 2013's Nintendo Direct. And when Hyrule Warriors launched, and an art book was included in the Japanese limited editions of the game, there were sketches of a female Link. And this female version of Link was considered as a possible playable character, but was scrapped during development, and fans found these sketches and why didn't this female Link get made? Popularity for this concept character grew on the internet, and she became one of the more widely requested characters for Koei Tecmo putting out the call for, hey, what characters could be DLC or in a future game? They're like, we want this female version of Link. And so this character, eventually named Linkle, was later announced for Hyrule Warriors Legends. She has her own little campaign story and everything. Super cute.
She's super cool. She uses dual crossbows. It's rad.
Oh yeah, very, very fun character to play as for sure. The trailer for Hyrule Warriors Legends, we see like it's running on a 3DS. What? It's a 3DS port? It leaked 6 days before its reveal at E3 2015, and then it was then confirmed. The definitive edition on Switch would be announced during a January 2018 Nintendo Direct. Hyrule Warriors reviewed positively, with a Metacritic average of 76 on Wii U, 70 on 3DS. Let's be honest, mostly because of those performance issues chugging along. The new 3DS could not help it. Let's put it that way. Although it was better on new 3DS, I guess. And then it got a 78 on Switch with the definitive edition. The abundant fan service for the Zelda franchise was praised, and it was just an overwhelming amount of content for completionists. But yes, it all boils down to how much you enjoy the repetitive gameplay, the grind that comes with the Musou territory. A lot of reviewers saying like, oh, the gameplay is repetitive, I didn't really like it. And it's like, you may not like that genre then. The game shipped 1 million copies by January 2015, according to Koei Tecmo, and I couldn't really find it nominated for any awards, which, granted, with those review scores, not too surprising, but also odd, considering the year 2014, and how weak that was for Game of the Year and things like that. When Game of the Year for 2014 was like between Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor and Dragon Age Inquisition.
All right.
It was a time.
That sure was a year, though I hear Inquisition's pretty good. I don't know. I've never played it.
It's a Game of the Year award-winning game. Oh, man. Then what is the legacy? Besides all of those re-releases, DLC editions, things like that, definitive edition. Well, Hyrule Warriors got another game, a sequel, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, released on November 20th, 2020 for Nintendo Switch. The game acts as a prequel to the events of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, so it features a lot of theming based on that game specifically and only, a lot of characters from that take on the universe, and it's still getting DLC updates to this day. So that is where Hyrule Warriors currently stands, embroiled in the Breath of the Wild take on The Legend of Zelda.
I still need to get back to playing that game.
I beat that game, but I don't know if I'm going to really dig into or care much about the DLC. I don't know. The composer for Hyrule Warriors that we'll highlight this week is named Masato Koike. Masato Koike lives currently in Kamakura, Kanagawa Prefecture in Japan. No information on a birth date or a birth year. But he mentioned how his father loved classical music, so there was always classical music playing in his home while he was growing up. But while he was playing games, that's what really made him aware of game music as a possibility. So he took piano lessons in elementary school, and then he also learned how to play woodwind instruments like the flute, and he can play the flute still today. But his composing is entirely self-taught, and he initially wanted to go to school and to university to make games. But composing became of interest when he made music for a stage show that he was a part of at university. And so then it's like, oh, this is a possibility. I like this idea of composing and making music. So some of his influences in composition from the video games side of things includes Koji Kondo, Koichi Sugiyama, and Yuzo Koshiro. Also Masa, M-A-S-A, which is a pseudonym for the original composer in the Warriors series. And I think he's now like the sound director for that franchise. And also Mahito Yokota, who Koike worked with on one of his earlier game projects. As far as classical music composer influences, these would include Brahms, Dvorak, and Tchaikovsky. So Masato Koike joined Koei in 2003 as a sound effects editor. And there didn't seem to be that much. I mean, he had a couple interviews, and that's really what I pulled this and other information from, but you can follow him on Twitter at Koike_Masato. His discography includes a whole bunch of Warriors-related games, or at least Musou games, at Koei Tecmo. So these would include Samurai Warriors Extreme Legends, and Samurai Warriors 2, Dynasty Warriors 5 through 9, Warriors Orochi 2, Z, and 3. When it comes to Hyrule Warriors, there's also on Legends, Definitive Edition, and Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. He also worked on Warriors All-Stars, and then also worked on the recent Fairy Tail game from Koei Tecmo, which I think was an action RPG. So a little bit of a different take, but a whole lot of Warriors. There are so many of those games that I had no idea existed.
Yeah, there's Musou is a I've only ever heard it talked about in like the context of there's 1 million of them and about 80% of them suck. And luckily Hyrule Warriors is not one of those. Hyrule Warriors is very good. So yeah, it's kind of a bloated franchise from what I can tell.
Yeah, but definitely pairing it with The Legend of Zelda seemed to be the right choice. A really solid game for sure. And when it comes to its music, the music is composed by Masato Koike and Yuki Matsumura. So Koike composed the fight music, while Matsumura composed selection screens and cutscene music. It just so happens all the tracks we've chosen have been composed by Masato Koike. And so Masa, that sound director, and also the sound director for this game, he informed Koike of his vision that the orchestral elements and the rock elements would interactively change as the game progresses. And so the two of them sat down and decided in concrete terms what would be the method of that expression. Koike noted that when he got the task to compose for this game, he researched Zelda once again. So certainly must have been familiar with the franchise, but to really sit and listen to the music, because if you're going to bring in Zelda music, you need to be very familiar with it. And so he said to make a piece for this game, half the time he'd spend watching a gameplay movie, and the remaining half of the time he'd write the piece all in one stretch. He noted how when he was making new music for the game, the Warriors' original pieces were carefully composed in such a way as to not bring back old memories of Zelda's world. On the other hand, the arrangements of Zelda's melodies really closely followed the original, but they were arranged so as to fully realize the, quote, Warriors quality. And you'll definitely be able to hear that when we talk about some of these tracks. That will be really good arrangements of these Zelda tunes. And Koike noted how he had to be really careful with those interactive elements when it was switching between rock and classical parts, since, amazingly, different genres, they have different qualities. So, especially when the player can hit triggers at any time, I just had to be really careful with crafting both versions of these songs. And then Koike is also credited in the music as the performer on flute. So if you hear a flute instrument playing in the music, that is Masato Koike.
Neat.
All right, let's get to the 5 critical tracks for Hyrule Warriors. Let's start with, we have to start with this one. This is Hyrule Field first. What better track to play on the first level of the game than an arrangement of the main theme of The Legend of Zelda? That classic overworld track from the original game, just brought up in that Warriors quality, and wow, it sounds so good. I think you could have put maybe a lighter track, especially when you're learning the basics, especially those who are new to a Musou game or a Warriors game. But if you're really being like, yeah, this is The Legend of Zelda, you do have to play this theme very early on. And it's such a good, driving, positive, engaging take on this theme.
Yeah, obviously this theme is a classic. One of the most classic songs in video game history. But like adding a rock sort of style to it, but then also, I don't know if those trumpets are real or MIDI, but either way, they actually sound really good. And that's cool. That's a hard thing to pull off.
I think they are real. A lot of humans were associated with performances, so I think this is all live recorded, yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, this song is great. It's a classic. It has to be here, I agree.
Number 2 on the Critical 5, let's move to Skyward Sword. And this is Skyloft. This is my favorite track from this game. Granted, it's tough to, compare side by side, Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time and all of the great music there, but I feel like this take on the Skyloft theme, to bring it that exciting rock instrumentation, it's so good. And then to bring in the Ballad of the Goddess with the big orchestral swell, and even past this clip, it takes it up another level, and it just sounds so good. I feel like for what is an opening little happy theme in Skyward Sword, to give it this much energy, again, we're talking like this Warriors quality, and you got to have really good music behind all of the repetitive action. So just a fantastic arrangement on what is a classic piece from Skyward Sword, but not one worthy of this much energy.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, that translated to being a battle song really well. Why? What? Okay, sure. Why not? All right. It's so good. And yeah, the best part is when it goes into Ballad of the Goddess, because that's not the first time we've heard Ballad of the Goddess in a rock format, but it never ceases to amaze me how that song translates really well to it.
And makes it sound like it's its own song instead of Zelda's Lullaby reversed.
Yeah, I forgot it is that, isn't it? Huh? Nice.
Yeah. So just a really good, just a couple right off the bat, these arrangements of classic Zelda themes. But let's get to kind of an own unique original Warriors track. And this is number 3 on the Critical 5. This is Silent Guardians. Talk about coming out of nowhere. We've mentioned before with beats that you could almost put a rap to. This is one for sure that you could imagine someone just sampling and then throwing, a rap over it. It's just a different drum sound. It's got a different vibe to it. You throw it on top of these dark, deep choral elements that are here. And it's for this level where Link acquires the Master Sword and he's going through the Temple of Time and you have these like sealed guardians and gates and different things that you got to achieve. But yeah, so it's like a kind of ancient sound, but like there's a purpose going forward as you're getting, honestly, his best weapon in the whole game. It almost feels like it has a darker quality to it than that though. And it made me think like, was this a Ganondorf theme at first? And going through a long play, no, it's this part of the game, but it's one that really stands out, and especially on a listen through the tracks, like, oh, I remember those deep vocals for sure.
Those deep vocals are 100% like the best part of the song. When I hear like the really pronounced beats, I think this song would fit, weirdly enough, in Crypt of the NecroDancer.
Yeah, it'd be slower, but it could totally work there.
Yeah, I mean, in the PC version of NecroDancer, you could put custom music on it, so, But, yeah, this song, I think this is my favorite song in the game. Those deep vocals really add a lot.
Yeah, and it's its own kind of original take, original music, not necessarily just an arrangement of a Zelda theme. Another original piece, but a totally different energy vibe to it. It's number 4 on the Critical 5 here, and this is Focal Line. Man, talk about a piece that starts with this clip, just hype with this electric guitar melody, and then it just goes, and the orchestration builds, and goes even further and further for like the 2-minute loop that it is. This is a really exciting piece, and I feel like it takes place when things have really turned in your favor on the map. You can almost just hear or feel the character running or gliding, throughout the map as you're trying to get to that next objective. And it's a positive piece here. Like there's no, dark evil vibes kind of like with that last one, but you're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get that last objective.
I feel like this song's name is one I hear a lot when people are talking about the soundtrack of this game. I don't think it's among my favorites, but it is definitely, it's got that motivation tone to it that, we're doing it. We're doing it. And I think it does a great job at bringing that vibe to the table.
But then we'll wrap things up with another tonal dramatic shift here, number 5 on the Critical 5 for Hyrule Warriors. This is Eclipse of the Moon. lot of dramatic vibes here, big orchestral swells, big choral melodies here. And I feel like this takes place in the battle against Sia. There's another piece that we'll get to on the cutting room floor that Koike even notes that like these pieces are meant to represent Sia and Lana. And I feel like for this final battle against Sia, you are hearing this song. There's also a guitar version of this, and it's also on the soundtrack and all that. It has that kind of rock energy to it, but this orchestral one stands out to me, and I really like when that big hit comes in with the chorus. It's real neat. Just again a different vibe to a great soundtrack.
I feel like the vocals in this one don't quite blend together the same way that Silent Guardians has its vocals, but it does still sound very good. Yeah, Sia and Lana are two very interesting characters, especially for them being the Koei Tecmo wanted a cute anime girl to put in the game, so they made these characters. Like, when you look at it from that perspective, they ain't so bad.
Yeah, they actually had some good development to them, and good music to represent them as well. So, with tracks on the cutting room floor, Joe, you have a couple. Hit me with them.
Well, my first one is a take on a classic. It's Dodongo Boss Battle. This song plays when you're taking on a Dodongo as your first big boss. And I mean, it's just a classic Zelda boss theme. I believe this is the version from Ocarina?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a rock version of the boss battle theme from Ocarina, and it is really good. There's not really much more to say other than it's just super hype.
It is hype. It's simple because, that arrangement is pretty simple from Koji Kondo, that, original Ocarina of Time piece. But to bring in the live performances, the guitars and all that, I think Koike did a really good job kind of transcribing it to this more modern Warriors energy.
And my other song on the cutting room track is also, in a way, a classic Zelda piece. It's Kakariko Village. So this is specifically based on the Kakariko Village theme from Twilight Princess, which, in my opinion, is the lesser Kakariko Village song, but whatever, it's fine, they're both good. And this generally represents Agatha, the bug girl, who is in this game, I guess. I still can't understand why she's there. She's fun to play as, at least. And yeah, there's some flute, though. There you go, that's Masato Koike, baby.
There you go. That's a really good performance. Also, just, a piece that in Twilight Princess was very subdued and relaxed. And it's kind of a ghost town, desert, tumbleweeds kind of going through it. But to bring it to this height battle energy, I mean, that's a really good translation. Yeah, great job from Koike with that flute performance for sure. My two songs on the cutting room floor. Let's get to that other Eclipse song. This is Eclipse of the Sun. And so it's a different take on that Eclipse theme, kind of similar to Eclipse of the Moon, but it's a little more triumphant in a way. This kind of takes place in, let's say this is like the Act 1 break, if you will, because this plays during the level just before Sia opens up the Gate of Souls and opens up all these timelines and just causes chaos in general. Just a big kind of positive piece, which you feel like, the characters, the heroes, are going to stop her from doing so before, and let's be honest, they fail. And it's interesting because here's the track your ear may have been attuned to listen to and hear this.
It almost sounds like the same guy too.
Right. And like, so when I'm listening to these tracks, I'm like, oh, that's it. That's our theme. Like it's what other games do you hear that kind of operatic male singing take place? And it's these two. And so I think ding, ding, ding. That's our theme. And it's just a great track that stands out, I think, while you're playing the game. A lot of people like this one. The other one on the cutting room floor for me is Twilight Field. Some people may title it Hyrule Field, TP, Twilight Princess, whatever. It is the arrangement of that Hyrule Field theme from Twilight Princess. Just a very good Zelda theme, let's be honest. Oh man, we still eventually have to talk about Twilight Princess on this show.
One day.
One day, I'm sure we'll get to it. But this is a great arrangement of this one. Again, bringing a lot more energy to this piece. It's an intense piece in the game to begin with, especially for a Hyrule Field overworld theme, but again, just amping it up that much more, just kind of tweaking that knob a little bit more for a Hyrule Warriors battle theme. So it represents kind of near the beginning of that Twilight Princess storyline branch, and I think it usually represents Midna in the game. So great theme in its original Twilight Princess, a great arrangement in this game.
I agree with that. It's very, very good, and Midna is great.
So what will I never forget about Hyrule Warriors? I mean, let's be honest, it's just the amount of content, especially if you get that definitive edition, and you go through the campaign, that's long enough. Then you go through all those maps and all those grids, and you try to get all the items and hit certain completion marks. There's so much here for the Musou grind, if that appeals to you in Hyrule Warriors, especially if you're a Zelda fan and you have not played the original Hyrule Warriors. I'm one, surprised, but two, definitely give it a shot. At least rent it.
I'll never forget that we have a friend who 100% completed this game. The definitive edition specifically.
It's an impressive feat, to be sure.
And I think she's insane anyways.
But when it comes to these two games with that open-throated, operatic, male singer that, God, I can't think of another place where I've heard singing just like that. It is Crypt of the NecroDancer with the Shopkeeper. It is Hyrule Warriors with Eclipse of the Sun specifically. And that's really what stands out. I mean, besides two great soundtracks, but the thread together, aside from Cadence of Hyrule, eventually they come together on their own. You know what? These are great soundtracks to cover on the show. So that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast that you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasherpieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of our episodes, but also a big Spotify playlist. If we cover a track from a video game and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to that monster playlist. So, Joe, what's being added this week?
Well, obviously, Warriors has the first-party Nintendo curse, and therefore is not on Spotify, but Crypt of the NecroDancer is, so you'll see those added.
Excellent. That's good to get more tracks there. When you're done listening, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST for feedback and how we're doing with these episodes, as well as suggestions for games that you'd like us to cover in the future on this show. Joe, who are you talking about next week?
I will be talking about Too Mellow.
And I will be talking about Masanori Ouchi. Interesting games to talk about for sure. But to play us out, we'll cover another fan cover remix, whether it's on OC Remix, YouTube, wherever it is. Surprisingly, not too much of Hyrule Warriors music specifically covered, so I looked for covers of Focal Line. And I did find one. It sounds really good, actually. I'm surprised of just how good this one sounds. It's by Sasakama on YouTube. Sasakama. And please enjoy that. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.